I never thought the word daughter could feel like a lie until the day my father spat it at me like an insult. I was 27, standing in my grandmother's study, the smell of old leather-bound books still heavy in the air, when he looked me in the eyes and said words that shattered everything I believed about my place in this family. You're not even her real granddaughter. Only blood relatives deserve the family fortune. It had only been 3 days since my grandmother's funeral. My grief was still raw, like a wound that hadn't begun to close, and already the family was circling like vultures over her will. The chandelier above us cast shadows across his face, making him look like a stranger. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My heart thundered in my chest. I managed to whisper, "What are you talking about?" His reply cut deeper than any knife. "Don't play innocent. Your mother's little secret isn't so secret anymore. Once the lawyer confirms you've got no Blackwell blood, you'll get nothing. My name is Jennifer Blackwell, or at least I thought it was. Until that moment, I believed Douglas Blackwell, the man I had spent my life calling Dad, the man whose approval I chased like a mirage, was my biological father. But standing in that cold room beneath the portrait of my grandmother, watching from above the fireplace, I realized my entire identity might be a fabrication. What I wanted was simple, the fairness my grandmother intended when she wrote her will. She had loved me, supported me, and told me more than once that I was her granddaughter, her only granddaughter. She believed in me when no one else did. But my father, the man who had belittled me my entire life, was ready to erase me from the family legacy with one cruel revelation. The irony was unbearable. All my life I thought his contempt was because I wasn't good enough, not ambitious enough, not sharp enough, not Blackwell enough. I graduated with honors. I built a career in historical preservation. Still, it was never enough for him. I told myself he was just impossible to please. I never imagined the truth that maybe his disdain came from something much darker, something he had been hiding all along. When he left the study, slamming the door behind him, I sank into my grandmother's chair. My fingers brushed the polished walnut where she had once written letters and signed her will. A text buzzed on my phone. It was from my mother. "We need to talk about your father, tonight. Alone." My stomach twisted. If Douglas wasn't my father, then who was? And why had this truth been buried for 27 years only to be unearthed now, just days after my grandmother's death, right before her fortune was to be distributed? Growing up, a Blackwell meant living under a shadow of wealth and expectation. The Blackwell fortune, built on pharmaceutical patents and iron-fisted investments, sustained 3 generations in privilege. Douglas, my so-called father, was the elder son, the heir, the one destined to hold the family legacy. His younger brother James, my Uncle James, was the opposite, brilliant, restless, unwilling to conform. He moved to Seattle to pursue medical research far from the suffocating world of Blackwell traditions. I only saw him on rare occasions, but those moments were warm, safe. He treated me like I mattered, like my thoughts had weight. And now I wondered, had the bond I felt with him been more than coincidence? I remembered the last time I sat with my grandmother for tea. Her fragile hand gripping mine, her eyes clouded but sharp. "Trust your instincts, Jennifer. Not everything is as it appears." At the time, I thought she was speaking of life in general, of the weight of choices I hadn't yet made. But now her words echoed like prophecy. That evening I met my mother at her favorite cafe, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city where no one cared about last names. She looked smaller than I remembered her usual elegance, dimmed by sleepless nights. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Her fingers twisted her wedding ring as she whispered, "Your father shouldn't have told you like that. It was cruel and selfish." I stared at her, my throat dry. "So it's true he's not my father?" She nodded, tears brimming. "It's complicated, Jennifer. More complicated than Douglas makes it sound." And then she unraveled a story that changed everything. A story of love, betrayal, and sacrifice, one that painted the man I called Dad in an even darker light. She told me about James, my uncle, and how before Douglas she and James had been in love. They planned a future together until his research took him to Seattle. Distance strained their bond, and in a moment of vulnerability, she turned to Douglas, who had always wanted her. When she discovered she was pregnant, she knew in her heart the child was James's. But Douglas claimed otherwise. He proposed quickly, wrapping her in a marriage built on possession, not love. I sat frozen, the cafe sounds blurring into a distant hum. My entire life had been rewritten in that hour. The father who rejected me wasn't my father at all. The uncle I admired might actually be the man who gave me life. And my grandmother she had known. She must have known. But why now? Why would Douglas tear off the mask only after grandmother was gone? My mother's answer was sharp, bitter. Because he's obsessed with the inheritance. He knows your grandmother may have left you something significant, and he wants it erased. Her words settled over me like ash. For the first time in my life, I saw Douglas not as a father, not even as a cruel man, but as a rival. He wasn't protecting the family legacy, he was protecting himself. And I realized with a mix of terror and resolve that if I didn't fight back, he would rewrite not only my inheritance, but my very identity. I didn't sleep that night. My mother's confession played over and over in my head until dawn painted the walls of my bedroom with a pale gray light. The air felt heavy, thick with the weight of secrets that had lived in silence for nearly 3 decades. Uncle James, my father. The possibility was too staggering to grasp, yet it explained so much: the warmth in his eyes when he saw me, the way he listened. Like my voice mattered, the subtle tension that always crackled whenever Douglas was in the same room. By morning, I knew I couldn't let Douglas win. Not this time. For 27 years, I had bent beneath his contempt, convinced it was my failure, my weakness. But now I saw it for what it was: control. If he could erase me from grandmother's will, he'd finally cement his dominance, not just over the family fortune, but over me. And I couldn't allow that. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of mahogany polish and paper. When I arrived for the first reading of the will, Douglas was already there, seated like a king at the head of the table, his expression carved in smug stone. A handful of relatives dotted the chairs, murmuring, their eyes flitting between us. The air thrummed with unspoken questions. When the lawyer began reading, my heart clenched. Grandmother's estate was vast, divided carefully among charities, cousins, and trusts. But then came the part that made Douglas sit up straighter. To my beloved granddaughter Jennifer, I leave the Blackwell Country estate and a portion of my investment portfolio in recognition of her devotion and integrity. Gasps rippled through the room. I felt the blood drain from my face. The country estate, the very heart of the Blackwell name. My inheritance wasn't just money, it was legacy. Douglas's face darkened, and before the lawyer could finish, he slammed his palm on the table. "She's not a Blackwell, she's not even my daughter." His voice boomed through the office, sharp as a blade. The lawyer blinked, stunned. The room erupted into whispers. My hands shook, but I forced myself to speak. My grandmother knew who I was, and she chose me. You can't erase that. His eyes blazed with a fury I'd never seen before. I'll demand a paternity test. The will can be contested if you're not blood. For a moment, I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Blood. That word again. How it haunted me. But then I remembered my grandmother's frail hand gripping mine, her words like a lantern in the dark. Trust your instincts, Jennifer. Not everything is as it appears. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Blackwell, unless you can present evidence disproving Jennifer's legal status as your daughter, the will stands. We operate under the presumption of legitimacy. Douglas's jaw tightened. His fury was palpable, but he said nothing more. After the meeting, I stumbled out of the office into the cool autumn air, my chest heaving. I barely made it to the street before my phone buzzed. It was Uncle James. I hadn't heard from him in months, but now his name glowed on my screen like fate itself. Jennifer. His voice was warm, careful. I heard about the will. And Douglas. He paused as though choosing each word with care. There are things you need to know. Things your grandmother told me before she passed. My heart pounded. What things? She suspected Douglas might try something. That's why she wrote the will the way she did. But there's more. Meet me tomorrow. It's time you knew the truth. When he hung up, I stood frozen on the sidewalk, my breath visible in the cold air. A part of me wanted to run to escape the tangled roots of this family forever. But another part, the part that had lived in shadows for too long, burned with determination. If Douglas thought he could bury me beneath secrets and lies, he was wrong. Tomorrow I would face Uncle James. Tomorrow I would learn whether the blood in my veins betrayed me or finally set me free. The next morning I drove out to a quiet corner of the city where Uncle James lived whenever he returned from his research trips. His townhouse was unassuming, nothing like the Grand Blackwell estate, and maybe that's why it felt safe. When he opened the door, the sight of him nearly undid me. His eyes, so much like mine, carried both warmth and sorrow. He ushered me inside without hesitation. The living room smelled faintly of coffee and old books, and framed photographs of medical conferences lined the shelves. But what caught my attention was a single picture on the mantel, him and my mother young, laughing, her arm hooked through his. My chest tightened. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was real. "I suppose she finally told you," he said quietly, studying my face. I nodded, my throat dry. "Mom said that you might be—" I couldn't finish the sentence. He sank into a chair, his hands clasped. "Yes, Jennifer. I believe I'm your biological father. But your grandmother and I agreed never to reveal it while she was alive. She thought protecting you from Douglas's wrath mattered more than the truth." His words hung in the air, heavy but undeniable. "Why now?" I whispered. He sighed. "Because Douglas is already using the truth as a weapon. And if you don't own it, he'll twist it until it destroys you." I sat across from him, my mind a whirlwind. "So my whole life has been a lie?" "No," he said firmly, leaning forward. "Your life has been yours. The love you gave your grandmother, your achievements, your strength, those were never lies. The only lie was Douglas pretending he had the right to define you." I wanted to believe him, but the ache of betrayal clawed at me. "He'll contest the will," I muttered. "He'll try to strip everything away." James's expression hardened. "That's why your grandmother left something else, not just the estate." He stood, moving to a desk drawer, and pulled out a sealed envelope. My hands shook as he placed it in mine. "She gave this to me months before she died. She said if Douglas ever tried to cut you out, this letter would protect you." I tore the seal carefully, my pulse thundering. Inside was my grandmother's familiar script, shaky but clear. "My dearest Jennifer, if you are reading this, then Douglas has done what I always feared. Let me say this plainly, you are my granddaughter. You carry my love, my legacy, and yes, the blood of a Blackwell, though perhaps not through Douglas. You are James's daughter, though the world may not accept it easily. I chose to keep this secret because I wanted you to grow free from the burden of Douglas's cruelty. If he dares to challenge your claim, know that the estate and the family's respect belong to you, not him. Fight, Jennifer. Fight for what is rightfully yours." Tears blurred the words, but I read them again and again, each line a balm and a weapon all at once. She had known. She had prepared for this. She had believed in me. I looked up at James, who watched me with quiet resolve. "She gave me copies," he said. "Legal ones, notarized. If Douglas tries to contest, the truth will come out in court." Relief and fear tangled inside me. If the truth comes out, everything changes. He nodded. "Yes, but maybe it's time it did." That night, I lay awake, replaying my grandmother's words. "Fight for what is rightfully yours." For the first time, I felt a surge of something stronger than grief, stronger than fear. It was rage sharpened into determination. The next day, Douglas called. His voice dripped with venom. "Enjoy your little victory while it lasts. I've already filed to contest the will. Once the truth about you comes out, you'll be nothing. No estate, no inheritance, not even the Blackwell name." I held the phone tightly, my pulse steady. "You're right about one thing," I said. "The truth is coming out. But it's not the truth you think." When I hung up, I realized something had shifted. For years, I had been afraid of him, his temper, his disdain, his power. But now he should be afraid of me. The day of the court hearing arrived with a chill that seeped straight into my bones. The Blackwell family name had always been whispered in reverence, associated with wealth, prestige, power. But that morning, as I stood outside the courthouse, I felt none of it. To me, Blackwell meant betrayal, lies, a fortress my so-called father had tried to lock me out of forever. When I entered the courtroom, Douglas was already there, his lawyer beside him, his expression smug but strained. He looked at me as though I were an intruder trespassing in a place he owned. My mother sat in the back row, wringing her hands, torn between guilt and fear. Uncle James sat closer, his presence a steady anchor. The judge called the case to order, and Douglas's lawyer wasted no time. Your Honor. He began, his voice sharp and rehearsed. We intend to prove that Jennifer Wright is not the biological child of my client, Douglas Blackwell. Therefore, she is not a rightful heir to the Blackwell estate as outlined in the will. Gasps stirred the courtroom. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to breathe. Then it was Megan's turn. My attorney, my friend, the one who had walked beside me since the night everything fell apart. She rose, her posture firm. Your Honor, biology is not the only measure of family, but even if it were, we have evidence that Jennifer is indeed a rightful Blackwell heir. Evidence provided by the late matriarch herself. The room shifted. Douglas stiffened. Megan handed the judge the notarized copies of my grandmother's letter. My heart pounded as the judge read aloud. Jennifer carries my love, my legacy, and yes, the blood of a Blackwell, though perhaps not through Douglas. She is James's daughter, though the world may not accept it easily. If he dares to challenge her claim, know that the estate and the family's respect belong to her, not him. The words echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Douglas's face turned ashen, his jaw clenching so tightly I thought it might crack. His lawyer sputtered, trying to recover. Your Honor, this letter is hearsay, but the judge cut him off. It is notarized, and it clearly demonstrates the decedent's intent. The will stands. I exhaled, my knees trembling beneath the table. For the first time in months, maybe years, the scales tipped in my favor. Douglas couldn't contain himself. He shot up from his chair, his voice booming. She is not my daughter. She's nothing. She doesn't deserve a cent of this family's legacy. The judge's gavel slammed down. Mr. Blackwell, sit down or you will be held in contempt. Silence fell. My hands shook, but not from fear, from release. I looked at Douglas, really looked at him. For years I had cowered under his shadow, mistaking cruelty for authority. But in that moment I saw him for what he was, a bitter man terrified of losing control. The ruling came swiftly. The will would be honored. The estate, the portfolio, the country home, they were mine. Not because of the blood that ran through my veins, but because my grandmother had chosen me. Because love and integrity mattered more than Douglas's obsession with control. When court adjourned, Douglas stormed out, his shoulders hunched, his power fractured. My mother lingered, tears streaking her face. She tried to approach me, whispering, Jennifer, I'm so sorry, but I couldn't find words. Not yet. I walked past her, my head high, Uncle James beside me. On the courthouse steps, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the stone in gold. James put a hand on my shoulder. You fought, he said softly. She would be proud. I swallowed the lump in my throat, whispering back, I hope so. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had reclaimed something Douglas could never take from me. My name, my voice, my worth. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Winning the estate didn't erase the wounds. It didn't heal the little girl who had spent years begging for a father's approval. That healing would take much longer. The days after the ruling felt strangely quiet, almost unreal. For so long, my life had been consumed by fear of Douglas, his temper, his contempt, his power over my identity. Now the silence was heavy, filled with echoes of everything I had lost and everything I had gained. I moved into the Blackwell country estate a month later. Walking through those grand halls, I felt both awe and grief. My grandmother's presence lingered in every detail, the worn armchair by the window, where she used to read, the scent of her lavender perfume, still clinging to the drapes, the garden she tended with trembling hands. It was beautiful, but it wasn't just a prize. It was a reminder. She had chosen me, trusted me, and now it was my duty to honor that trust. One evening, as I stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens, I thought about Douglas. Rumors swirled through the family that his finances were collapsing. Without the estate, without control of the portfolio, he was exposed. The empire he thought would be his alone had slipped through his fingers. Part of me wanted to gloat. Part of me wanted him to feel the humiliation he had inflicted on me for years. But when I pictured his face in court red with rage, I realized something: he was already punished. His punishment wasn't losing the inheritance. It was watching me stand tall in the place he had tried so desperately to erase me from. His punishment was knowing he had failed. My mother visited once, hesitant and fragile. We walked the garden path together in silence until she finally whispered, "I should have told you the truth years ago. I should have protected you." I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger, just a deep, aching sadness. "You can't change the past," I said quietly, "but you can decide if you want to be in my future." Her tears fell silently, and I knew the choice was hers to make. As for James, my real father, our bond grew slowly, carefully. We met for dinners, shared stories, built the foundation we'd been denied for so long. It wasn't simple. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. And real was all I ever wanted. In the months that followed, I learned to breathe again, to let go of the need for Douglas's approval, to see myself not as the daughter he rejected, but as the woman who had survived him. Standing in the estate library one night, I found my grandmother's favorite book, its pages worn, her notes scribbled in the margins. Tucked inside was another letter, one she hadn't told anyone about. It was short, but it said, "Everything, Jennifer, your worth was never his to decide. Never forget that you are enough." I cried then, not from pain, but from release. For the first time, I believed her. So this is my story. A story of betrayal, of secrets buried and unearthed, of a father who tried to erase me, and a grandmother who made sure he couldn't. A story of finding strength where I thought I had none, and of finally understanding that blood does not define love. If you've ever been told you're not enough, that you don't belong, that you're not worthy, please hear me. Their lies do not define you. Your truth does. Your courage does. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to fight for your place when someone tried to take it from you? I'd love to hear your story too.